It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. The Marc Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Marc is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Marc Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And thanks for tuning in on WHP 580 AM and News Talk 104.1 WEJS. And if you'd like to watch prior podcasts of the show or take a look at some great merchandise we have, including our popular Right to Bear Arms muscle shirt and the We're Glad You're Our Neighbor, Just Please Don't Kill Us yard signs and T-shirts, you can go to the MarcScaringiShow.com website. And for more political and legal news throughout the course of the week, don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Well, we just concluded a spectacular Republican National Convention. The president's speech on Thursday night was one of his best. He showed strength, poise, and gravitas. He looked and spoke presidential, much to the chagrin of so many of his critics, by the way. You know, it was not one of his raucous campaign speeches that we're so used to seeing him and hearing him give. You know, but that really wouldn't be appropriate given the venue of the speech on the South Lawn of the White House. It was more like a State of the Union address with its somber tone, its list of accomplishments, and its agenda for the future. And I thought it was a wonderful speech, and the president acquitted himself quite well. Karl Rove, the Republican strategist, he broke down the speech by word count per topic. And he concluded that the biggest part of the speech was devoted to a defense of traditional American values and patriotism. And the second biggest portion was devoted to promises made and promises kept. And the third part of the speech that had the most words was the topic of law and order. Now, you know, over the course, which I think those were the right topics, the defense of traditional American values is so important in today's political climate because we're seeing the desecration of traditional American values all across the country by the Democratic Party, the media, and these radical left-wing groups that are tearing statues of American heroes down, who are rioting in the streets of our country, who are criticizing strongly the principles of the founding of America. You have the New York Times and the 1619 Project trying to rewrite the birth of our nation into one that was tied directly to racism and to slavery, and that so much of that is so wrong, and so many Americans want to believe what is true about America is that it's the greatest place on earth and the highest. It was founded with the highest ideals known to mankind. So that is all under assault by the left in our country, and the Democratic Party has moved so far to the left that it's embraced these anti-American values, if you can even call them values. So Trump's defense of traditional American values, his obvious patriotism and love for our country was the biggest part of his speech and will do well for him in the elections this fall. The second biggest part of his speech devoted to his promises made, promises kept, it really is remarkable with this presidency. He promised so much during the campaign. And the campaign in 2016, remember, it was so much about policy. That's one of the main reasons why, or one of the reasons why I supported Donald Trump as a candidate in 2016. It was a real policy-focused campaign. The three biggest policies are return to the America First agenda on trade, immigration, and foreign policy, the cornerstones of Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. are still with him today. They've guided him as he's moved through the first 4 years of his presidency, and he's done well to advocate and promote those three particular policies. The United States has not been in a major military conflict under the 4 years of the Trump presidency, and that's a remarkable accomplishment. And the president is to be congratulated for it. And then the third point, the law and order part of the speech, so critical in today's climate of lawlessness and rampant crime and violence and arson going on in major cities across the country, Portland, Seattle, Kenosha, Wisconsin being the latest. And Trump is grabbing that law and order mantle. And similar to the Nixon 1972 reelection campaign, liberals will decry Nixon's reelection campaign as based upon some sort of racist Southern strategy. Totally false. Nixon ran against the protests and the riots that were occurring across the country on our college campuses mainly back then, but also there were riots in the big cities in the late 60s. And Nixon ran against that. He ran on law and order, and he won, I think, the greatest electoral landslide victory in the history of our country, I think even bigger than Reagan's reelection. Maybe we'll have some political expert call in and correct us if we're wrong on that. But my goodness, we already have calls coming in. I haven't even finished the first part of the show, but we'll jump to those calls. And if you'd like to call in and comment on the Republican National Convention or the elections coming up this fall, you're welcome to do so. Let's hear from Jim from Carlisle. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hello, Mark.
Yes, Jim, go ahead.
I love your show, and we listen to it every chance we get.
Thank you.
My question is, I was looking at all this turmoil that you expect to receive with the all these mail-in ballots and stuff, and I could see this counting going on forever to come up with the winner. And I was wondering what were the results, or what will happen if come January 20th it's not resolved. So Trump would no longer be president, and there wouldn't be an elected president. So would that go to the Speaker of the House?
Oh my goodness, Jim, that's a very difficult question to answer. If there are not sufficient votes in the Electoral College, if neither candidate gets a majority, then I believe that does go to the House. Under our Constitution, I'd have to double check that. We haven't confronted that situation in the history of our country, except for a few times very early in our republic. Although we got close to it, remember back in 2000 with the Bush-Gore election and the contest of the election by both campaigns, and the election actually being decided by the United States Supreme Court, if you'll recall. Back then, when the challenge had gone up through the Florida courts, went to the Florida Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court essentially reversed the holding of the Florida Supreme Court, stopped the recount, and gave the electoral win to George W. Bush. So it's quite possible, and there were critics of that Supreme Court decision that said really, the Supreme Court should not have taken up that issue, and it should have gone to the House of Representatives. But that's a fascinating question, Jim. I really hope we don't get there this time around. But to give you a more complete and legally accurate answer, I'd have to hit the books. I'd have to do a little more research. But thanks for your call. I appreciate the call. And thanks for listening.
Well, we certainly appreciate you giving an answer. And we hope that it doesn't get like that either. It's just that you see that possibility with all the turmoil that they're trying to create. But thank you very much for your response.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for calling. And a very good question. It's something that's unprecedented, the sheer numbers of mail-in ballots this year. And we've seen news stories about all kinds of problems involved in elections that have already taken place this year, with missing ballots, ballots that weren't delivered properly, ballots that got in late, We've had a couple of congressional races, I believe, where it took weeks and many, many weeks before the elections were finally determined. And that certainly is something to be very much concerned about this time around. And I'll have to, as I told Jim, and I'll tell the other listeners, I'll have to do a little more legal research on that particular question. But it's certainly one that's on the minds of a lot of Americans that we need answers to. We need to make sure that we have a smooth transition of power. I think the transition of power will be from Trump to Trump. So hopefully we won't have to deal with that situation. Listen, we're going to take a brief commercial break, and I want you to stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Now, more of Marc Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is the place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is the place where we talk about the important legal and political issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And we took an early call from one of our listeners, and we got somewhat stumped on that very difficult question that was posed. And I think the question is, does the president have to leave office on January 20th if he is not reelected? That is the law. His term does end on January 20th. And if he's not reelected, he'll have to leave office. But I think the issue was, well, what happens if we don't get all of the ballots counted? Then there very well could be a lawsuit that's filed. We talked about Bush v. Gore back in 2000, and our resident constitutional scholar, Mr. J.C. Floyd Esquire, he has advised that we're correct that if there's not a majority vote in the Electoral College, the vote for the president goes to the House of Representatives, and J.C. also instructed something I wasn't aware, that the vote for vice president actually goes to the Senate. So I'll have to brush up on my Constitution, but that's some wise scholarship from our own Mr. J.C. Floyd. I guess it makes somewhat sense because the vice president is the president of the Senate. And back in the day, early in our republic, there was this notion that the vice president wasn't really a member of the executive branch, that he was really a member of the legislative branch, because his role in the Constitution was to be president of the Senate. And there's even early in the Washington administration, if we can go that far back, that's kind of the way President George Washington viewed his vice president, John Adams. When President Washington would have cabinet meetings, he would excuse his vice president from attending and participating because Washington didn't really view him as part of the administration, but as part of the legislative branch, as part of the Senate, or at least that's the way the HBO picture John Adams portrayed it. So I'll have to hit the books there a little bit and give you some better answers. But we've got let's see, a couple of other calls already. And I want to try to take these in order. So we have Mary from West Hanover. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hello. Am I on?
Yes.
Okay.
You are. Go ahead.
I have a question. We have been getting phone calls from the Trump administration urging us to apply for mail-in ballots. And we got in the mail today. We got the application for mail-in ballots with urging to take action now and apply for a ballot. We've heard President Trump say that he doesn't trust mail-in ballots. I don't understand why they're wanting us to do that. Do you have any idea why they'd be urging voters to vote by mail-in ballot?
Mary, that's a great question. I don't have an inside track on why the Trump campaign is pushing mail-in voting. I know they're pushing it in states where there is some check being done by the bureaus of election as to the validity of the applicant for the mail-in ballot. And there are some states, regrettably, where mail-in ballot applications are being mailed out indiscriminately to people who haven't even applied for them, and so there's less of a verification process.
Yes, and I understand that, and I think there's a very real possibility of fraud with mail-in ballots. So I've heard President Trump say that, and I just don't understand why we're Republican voters, and we certainly are going to vote for President Trump, but I just don't understand why they want us to vote by mail-in.
Yeah, Mary, I noticed that too. A little bit of a dichotomy in the message from the president. You're exactly right. A little contradictory, so to speak. But I imagine it's just his campaign wants to push as many people to vote as possible, and they're pushing the mail-in voting option for those Americans who have concerns about the COVID-19, the viral illness. I, for one, will certainly be voting in person on election day. Yeah, I want to make sure my vote is tallied. That's the way I voted this spring. I went to the voting booth this spring, and it was very, very safe and very sanitized. I had no problem. I was in there maybe for 5 minutes. It was so short. It was very efficient. The people in our voting booth, the judges of elections and others who were running it did a great job. I had no problem. I'm going to be voting in person, Mary, and as are you apparently. So
yes,
thanks for the call. Appreciate that call, and let's get some others here. We have Richard from Harrisburg. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Yes, sir. Good day. I wanted to first comment on the 2000 Bush-Gore election. I was totally happy and agree with the United States Supreme Court taking that over, control of that over from the Florida Supreme Court, because to my memory, the biggest issue, and there was multiple, was that the Florida Supreme Court was turning it into a circus as far as changing laws and reinterpreting voter laws during and after an election. And they were turning it into an absolute other circus, and that's why the United States Supreme Court jumped in and finally said, enough, no more circus land. Stop making it, whatever word you want to pick from it. And I also wanted to talk about a little bit quickly about political vocabulary, especially with the young people. I'm not yelling at you, but I heard you again, and the big names do it, Hannity and Beck and Limbaugh, not as much, but the young people haven't been taught about communism. They haven't been taught that that's the left and what left. And when people, a little bit older people, when we talk about you're a radical leftist instead of left, and these leftist Democrats, the young people don't have the slightest idea what we're talking about. We can't just sit there and throw these words out. They don't know the hell your history of Russian communism, Chinese communism, North Korea, the Korean War, Vietnam, Communist Cuba, and on, the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain. They don't know all this stuff. And we just assume they do, and we say leftist, you're a far leftist. That means nothing to a 25-year-old and 30 and 35-year-old person that's never been taught anything. It means absolutely nothing to them. They don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and Richard, thanks for that call. I think that's an excellent point, and I want to address that. We're going to take a commercial break in a little bit here, but yeah, you're right. No, when I refer to the left, I'm not speaking of it in a way to try to encourage young voters to vote for my candidate. I'm just trying to explain the political circumstances of the day. But you do raise a very good point that these young voters, who many of whom are inclined to left-wing politics because that's what they hear in their colleges, universities, and even primary and secondary schools, that seems to be the prevailing component of our educational system. They have no real experience with the horrors of socialism. And I think that's why it was important to have the individual speak at the Republican National Convention, the older gentleman, the Cuban-American, who had escaped the horrors of Fidel Castro's brutal communist dictatorship on that island. But, Richard, you're right. We are so far removed from the real horrors of socialism, because we had no direct experience with it here in our country, and we fought fascism and Nazism in World War II, and that's so long ago. And our long Cold War with the Soviet Union was over in the late 80s and early 90s, before so many of our young voters were likely even born. Yeah, so you're right. It is very far removed from the experience and the collective consciousness of so many of our young voters. So that's a dilemma that we have today, where we Republicans, we conservatives, are trying to explain to young voters why they have to vote for the Republican Party because of its principles on private property rights and individual rights. And freedom and liberty, and how these are cherished values that can slip away very quickly with the left-wing regime in power. We'll talk more about this when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show.
Let's get back to The Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And boy, the phone lines are hot today. We've got lots of callers who are very focused on this upcoming election, important issues concerning whether we're going to have free and fair elections this fall. The issue with regard to the mail-in ballots is a big issue. The media is talking about. I saw some news stories about whether if there were not a declared president by January 20th, if Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi would become president, and absolutely not. That is an impossibility. So don't worry about President Pelosi. And we're talking about the Republican National Convention. And I know I've got lots of callers on the line, so just hang on. I'm going to get to you in a minute. I wanted to talk about some of the speakers, but we've had so many calls. We haven't been able to do that. But I just want to talk about Melania Trump for a minute, and then we'll go back to our calls. You know, we don't hear from Melania Trump all that much. I'm going back to we didn't hear from Laura Trump all that much, or Michelle Obama. Well, I guess we heard from Michelle Obama a little bit more, but I guess you'd have to go all the way back to the Clinton administration, where we had a First Lady, Hillary Clinton, who was much more active politically within her husband's administration. Remember, Hillary Clinton, she ran the health care initiative in Bill Clinton's first term. Hillary Care, we called that health plan that went down in flames and helped the Republican Revolution of 1994. That actually drew me down to Washington, D.C., where I worked in the United States Senate as a young Senate staffer. Those were some pretty great times in my life, and an amazing period to be working in politics. But we don't hear that much from Melania Trump. But we did during the Republican National Convention, and her speech I thought was absolutely magnificent. I thought, of course, she looks stunning and elegant, which she always does, but she's also quite eloquent. Her English is not 100% perfect, but you can tell she is a patriot and she loves being an American. She even talked about that in her speech. She said, as an immigrant and a very independent woman, I understand what a privilege it is to live here and to enjoy the freedoms and opportunities that we have. So, you kind of overlook a little bit of the somewhat broken English, because she loves our country. And so we love her back, regardless of her national origin. And that's the great thing about America. We accept and we embrace people from all nations around the world who come here and want to become Americans. And when they do the hard work, as she talked about in her speech, of studying for that immigration test and passing that test, and when they talk about how great our country is, we love them and accept them. We just have a little bit of trouble with people who come from foreign countries. They come to our country, perhaps illegally, and they're here and they denounce America. And it's not just like a constructive criticism. It's bold, absolute denunciations of the very foundation, the foundational principles of our country. Well, that gets a kind of a negative reaction from a lot of patriotic Americans. What a contrast, by the way. Speaking of this, what a contrast between Melania Trump's speech to the RNC convention and Michelle Obama's speech to the Democratic National Convention. Michelle Obama's speech was dark and down, and she used that hackneyed expression, systemic racism. And what a horrible place America is, and what a horrible man Donald Trump is, and that's just it's such a downer. And remember Michelle Obama in the primaries in her husband's first run, talking about how the fact that he started to surge in the primaries was the first time she was proud of her country. That really strikes patriots the wrong way. And Melania Trump, the total opposite of that. And Melania Trump even threw a little shade at Michelle Obama during Melania's speech, when Melania said, "As you have heard this evening, I do not want to use this precious time attacking the other side. Because as we saw last week, that kind of talk only serves to divide the country further." And I think she's probably talking about Michelle Obama and Barack Obama for their very pointed denunciations of the person of Donald Trump and the policies of the Trump administration that they just don't have disagreements with, as if we have disagreements in a debating society. They're characterizing the Trump policies and the Trump agenda and the person of Trump as racist and evil and something that must be purged from our society. And we're seeing that being played out in our politics, in the media, and in cities across the country where there's this purging going on, where the statues of our greatest statesmen, even George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and others, must be purged from our country. That's the way to destroy this country. That's what that will result in. So we'll go back to these callers. I know you've been holding on for quite some time. So let's hear from Ben from Lancaster. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
How are we doing today?
Good, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing well. I just wanted to briefly mention, first of all, I am 61 years old. So I am, I guess, I don't think about it too often, a senior citizen. And I am a poll worker,
61.
and I work the polls.
You sound a lot younger than 61, I'll tell you that.
Well, thank you. God's been good to me. But I work the polls, and I worked all day in the spring. And I just wanted to assure anybody who's nervous that there is nothing to be afraid of. I know in Lancaster County, and I'm sure in other places as well, they were very stringent about making sure that we were using social distancing. Everything was being disinfected before and after use. So I would really encourage anybody, if they're nervous, if they're afraid, not to worry and get out and make sure you vote.
Well, great. That's a little public service announcement from Ben from Lancaster. We appreciate that.
All right. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks, Ben. And we'll double down on that public service announcement from Ben from Lancaster, but we'll focus it on the Republicans. We want all the Republicans to go out and vote. Democrats, stay at home. No, I'm just kidding. Everybody go out and vote, but everybody vote for Trump. And as I said earlier, I voted on primary election day, and it was a smooth, clean, and safe process. So I'm encouraging all my friends and family to vote in person on election day. So you don't have to worry about whether or not your mail-in ballot gets there on time, is counted on time. Get that vote in. because we want to run those numbers up as high as we can on Election Day, because they'll count those votes on Election Day, and you'll see those vote tallies. It's just the mail-in ballots that come in late or come in such mass that they're not able to be counted in time. That's going to be the problem. But back to the Republican National Convention and the speeches, Melania Trump, I thought, did an amazing job. She did have a little joke at her husband's expense, not so much, where she said, whether you like it or not, you always know what he's thinking. And she got a chuckle in the audience out of that. I wish they would have panned to the president so we could have gotten a look at his reaction to that comment by his wife. But it's so true. And that is what is, in my view, refreshing about this president. He doesn't speak in that typical political pablum where you hear politicians who've held office their entire lives. They open their mouths, and out comes this kind of standard boilerplate talking point non-answer. And you kind of go away from that experience not really learning anything true or honest about the politician's thoughts and his plans for action. But the opposite is with Donald Trump. There are lots. I watched a lot of the RNC and some of the DNC, and with regard to the RNC, when the politicians came up to speak, I pretty much tuned them out. Of course, I listened to Melania Trump. I listened to Donald Trump Jr. and President Trump pretty thoroughly. I don't really, obviously, Melania and Donald Trump Jr. are not politicians, and the president is only reluctantly a politician. But the rest of them, it's almost, I just can't hear them anymore because it's just so much of the same old, same old. Now, I listened to Rand Paul, a United States Senator from Kentucky, because I like the way he speaks, because he's kind of thinking through the issues as he's speaking to you. And you can tell he's in this political game, if you will, for the right reasons. He honestly wants to solve the problems that he's working on, and he's thinking through the solutions. And you get to play a part in that when you listen to him speak about the issues. So I'll listen to him. But what I really enjoyed in the RNC were all of the non-politicians. I thought Herschel Walker, oh my gosh, I thought he was amazing. I thought he was wonderful. He's not a politician, obviously. He's a great football player, an amazing athlete. But he spoke honestly, authentically about his personal relationship with Donald Trump, the man. And testified to Donald Trump's character as a friend and as a human being, and I thought that was so powerful. The other non-politician who I thought pretty much carried the convention for the Republican Party, and I'll talk about this young man, and then we'll take some other calls because I know we got lots of callers there in the line in the phone booth. I don't know. Do we have a phone booth? I'm not even sure what that is, or a phone bank. But Nicholas Sandmann, oh my goodness, the young Covington Catholic High School student, who I think is in college now. I think his freshman year in college. He's the young man who was down there on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial a year or two ago. He was down there for the March for Life, which is in the month of January every year. To promote and celebrate the right to life and the defense of the innocent unborn. And you'll remember he was wearing the Make America Great Again hat, and he was confronted by that Nathan Phillips, the elder. They always call him a Native American elder. I mean, by the way, what is that? What is a Native American elder? I wonder if Nathan Phillips is he the patriarch? Is he a tribal leader? Is he a great man who has a large family and employs a lot of people in a business and makes his Indian tribe wealthy and healthy and secure? If that's what Native American elder means, then I'm all for it. But I assume the media just gave him that moniker of elder because they automatically they automatically grabbed on to the narrative that Nathan Phillips was trying to accomplish when he got up in that young boy's face and was beating that drum incessantly, trying to provoke that young boy, those young boys, into them having some sort of verbal or physical response to him, so that he could continue this media narrative that young white boys in MAGA hats are violent racists, which is not true. And that young Nicholas Sandmann, he held his ground. He didn't confront the Native American elder. I don't know about you when you were in high school. I was in high school many, many years ago, and if me and my high school friends were at an event like that and we were confronted by someone like that, the black Hebrew Israelites were down there too, and they were hurling racial epithets and horrible slanders at those Covington high school boys. I imagine my friends and I would have reacted a little bit differently, and it wouldn't have gone so well for the other side, so to speak. But that young Nicholas Sandmann, he didn't lose his cool. He kept his cool, and he reacted appropriately. And then, of course, the media destroyed him. But you know the story. You've watched the news, and we've talked about this on the Marc Scaringi Show many times before. But I just wanted to give some accolades to this young man for the speech that he gave at the Republican National Convention. And I think that's all you need to do to know whom to vote for this fall, is to listen to that man's speech. You can YouTube it. He just presents what is so true about what is happening in this country, and he had a real life experience of this left-wing culture trying to cancel him out, remove his existence, so to speak, because he's a white male MAGA hat wearing Trump supporter. And they tried to cancel him out, to call him a racist, to destroy him as a human being. But he stood his ground, and he actually fought back. And he got a great lawyer. He sued the media, and he got a big judgment out of CNN. So I'm happy for this kid. I wish him the best. And I thought he did a wonderful job really driving home what the real issue is this fall. We're going to take a brief commercial break. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show.
Now back to The Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. And this is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And we're talking about the Republican National Convention and the upcoming presidential elections. But before we continue that chat, I really enjoyed that ad, the John Roa show. Never heard of it before, but I think I'm going to tune in because I love his lead-in. Are all successful people full of crap? That sounds like a great show. Maybe we'll have to do, JC, maybe we'll have to do a couple of segments of our show using that topic. Are all successful people full of crap? I think that would make for a great show. But in any event, back to our show, and we're talking about the Republican National Convention. I know we've got some callers on. We're going to get to you in a second. Let me just talk about Donald Trump Jr. I thought Donald Trump Jr., I did listen to him. Ivanka Trump, I kind of paid attention because she was introducing her husband. I'm sorry, she was introducing her father, the president. But she seems like she comes from the elite enclave there of Manhattan and probably has some a basic liberal political worldview. I'm gathering, so I don't really pay much attention to what she's saying. But Donald Trump Jr. comes from that same background, obviously, but he really appears to have a very different political philosophy. And he did a great job. He came out swinging. Beijing Biden. How about that sobriquet or that moniker for Joe Biden? Beijing Biden is so weak on China that the intelligence community recently assessed that the Chinese Communist Party favors Biden. Biden has promised to take that money back out of your pocket and keep it in the swamp. That makes sense, though, considering Joe Biden is basically the Loch Ness monster of the swamp. So Donald Trump Jr. got a few good shots in at Joe Biden. I think Beijing Biden's a great one. I hope they continue with that. Remember, Joe Biden's the one who signed all of those free trade deals, NAFTA, and several other free trade agreements. Joe Biden also supported bringing China into the World Trade Organization, giving them most favored nation trading status with the United States back in the early and mid-'90s. Those were disastrous economic policies that helped to hollow out the core of American manufacturing and move our manufacturing not just to Mexico, but to China. And it's done so much damage to Pennsylvania in particular. These are these liberal, progressive trade policies called free trade, but it's not free for the American people. It's a fallacy, and I'm so glad. It just makes you poor. It makes you a debtor, and it removes the manufacturing from your country, and the manufacturing is the most valuable part of our economy, much more valuable than banking and finance. Its manufacturing is what makes a country strong and helps to make a people great. It provides great jobs for the working people in our country. Biden abandoned them, embraced this globalist free trade ideology promoted by the elites of both the Republican and Democratic Party, went to China when he was vice president with his son Hunter, got his son Hunter a nice deal with this equity fund where young Hunter Biden was going to manage about $1.5 billion in investments from the Chinese Communist Party. So the Biden family is directly connected to the Chinese Communist Party and gets its money, its financing, its revenues, its cash from that relationship. So sure, Joe Biden on the campaign trail said China's not a competitor of ours. What? China's not a competitor of ours? This is it's not just Joe being stupid and naive, which he is. It's also Joe covering for the fact that his family has a huge business deal with the Chinese Communist Party. That's Beijing Joe. It's remarkable that this is not the number one issue in this election, but for whatever reason, because the media won't even cover it, it doesn't get much play. But enough about me and my thoughts. I want to get to the phone lines. We have Al from Harrisburg. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hello, Mark.
Yes, Al.
I just wanted to say something about the woman who called and about the mail-in ballots. You know, a lot of people are confused. Trump is not opposed to absentee balloting. In fact, that's fine. It's been done for years. We applied for one. We fill out an application. They check us out, you know, our address and our email and the driver's license number and or PennDOT identification number. All that information is given to them, and they check it out and make sure that you're registered to vote and all that. And then they say it's been approved, and they will send you an absentee ballot. Now, that's the main thing. The mail-in ballots, where they just want to distribute them to everybody in some states, and there's no way that they can check to be sure that these people are legitimate, that they're not fraud.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Al, I do, and you're exactly right on the absentee ballot and how it works in Pennsylvania. But Mary from West Hanover was talking about the Trump campaign supporting mail-in balloting, and they have been supporting, mail-in voting. They have been supporting mail-in voting. Now, Trump himself will distinguish. He will say that he supports those states that will send the mail-in vote in response to an application for the mail-in vote ballot that is sent by the intended voter, because then they can do the verification and the checking that you just outlined for how we handle absentee ballots. But there are some states that are sending mail-in ballots indiscriminately throughout the state to individuals who have not applied for them, and
That's
that,
right.
I think, is the problem, and that's what Trump is focused on. It's that type of mail-in balloting process that will have some real verification problems, and that's what Trump is concerned about. But Al,
right.
thanks for your call. Appreciate hearing from you. And let's take some other calls here while we have the time. We have John from Harris. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show. John, go ahead.
We lost John.
Okay. Well, thanks, Casey. John couldn't wait. He's got somewhere to go. Something more important to do. As we all do in about 5 minutes, we'll end the show, and I'll go out and hopefully play some tennis with my young children and get them out on the tennis court before the rain. Although it looks beautiful out there today, and maybe the threat of all of this rain has caused people to stay in and listen to the Marc Scaringi Show, which is a good thing. And so we were talking about the Republican National Convention, Donald Trump Jr.'s pretty strong denunciation of Joe Biden and the Biden campaign. And I thought Donald Trump Jr. did a terrific job. Some other excerpts from his speech. He said, this time the other party is attacking the very principles on which our nation was founded: freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the rule of law. Thomas Jefferson famously said, I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. Our founding fathers believed there was nothing more important than protecting our God-given right to think for ourselves. That's Donald Trump Jr. That's an excerpt from his nomination speech for his father. And brilliant words and right on the money. In this country today, it is so hard to speak your mind and speak the truth about how you truly feel about a political issue, because you will be condemned, you will be canceled by the media and the left that dominate the prevailing school of thought about what is appropriate to think and say and what's not. And Trump Jr. hit that right on the head. So I thought it was a terrific convention. And I think that it's going to mark the Trump turnaround. And now you're going to see Trump in the next month or two. He's going to go to a victory in the fall. And this convention is what